In the tradition of Malcolm X, peace be unto you. I have a few questions that I want to throw out to you and maybe make a few comments about some of them. They're about stories in the Old Testament, characters in the Old Testament, and when the Old Testament was written or started, and about the time that it was finalized. Here's my first question. If the character in the Old Testament named Abraham had never been written about, his wives, his children, his saga, would you even know of such a character? Would you have that character embedded in your, I can't say memory, but in your repertoire of perceptions, images in your subconscious mind? Would anyone be talking about that character if Noah, the man called Noah, the character Noah in the Old Testament, and I'm speaking specifically of the Old Testament right now, if the story of Noah and the ark had never been written about in the Old Testament, would you be talking about that character? Would you be believing that character existed? Would you care about the story of that character? And what if the character Samson, you remember Samson and Delilah? What if that character had never been written in the Old Testament? Would you know about that story? Would you be talking about that story and the moral of that story? And I could go on and on. David, Solomon, Bathsheba, all those stories. That have been talked about which movies have been made during the heyday of Hollywood by Cecil B. DeMille, putting those images in the minds of millions and millions and millions of people and passed on from generation after generation as entertainment. Would they be significant? Of course not, because they would be unknown. In logic, all of those characters would have been classified under having no existential import. They were made up. They were made up and promoted as historical truth. Now, most people being illiterate for thousands and thousands of years, because as you go back in time, fewer and fewer people are literate. Those types of stories could be told and not perceived as being fabrications. I mean, we're very nice to say mythology, but they were just lies told as what we would call propaganda today. Now, I'm not saying all these things to make you feel good. I'm reaching for truth. I'm reaching for transcendental truth, which may for some of you, release you from the dungeon of the mind that you are in. So it would behoove you to at least listen. You see, the truth is that the Old Testament wasn't finalized until about the 17th or actually the 19th century. They were still trying to determine what they wanted to put in it. It was written after the Babylonian exile. It was written after the Babylonian exile. And there's a book you might want to read, Who Wrote the Bible? That's the title. Just go to Amazon, Who Wrote the Bible? Read it. But see, I understand today, people don't read. So how do you get them to start thinking critically, asking questions, if they won't read? You can't. They rely on movies, they rely on music, songs, lyrics. They rely on hearsay, gossip. And all of that makes it virtually impossible to stimulate social change in a better direction than what we have today. You see, the political establishment that we're seeing unfold today is the product of myth thinkers. Myth thinkers who want to impose their mythological imagery on the masses of the people, who they know are intellectually docile. And I don't mean to put you down, but the truth is that if you're not searching for the truth, you're docile. Let me just put down the basic thesis of this question and self-response session. They're all made up. None of those characters has existential import. In other words, they didn't exist. Some were plagiarized, like Samson from Hercules, the Greek mythology, etc., etc. But you are responding to those characters in your daily lives, in your conversations, as though they actually existed, meaning you're living a false life from that perspective. I'm not saying your job is false. I'm not saying your family is false. I'm just saying that if you are acting upon those mythologies as though they were real, then they become real in their consequences in your life. And if those myths are false, and they are, then a very large proportion of your life is false. And you may be damaging people, damaging the environment indirectly. And the people behind you, whether they be your corporate executives or the president of the United States, the Congress, they're all capitalizing or monetizing your ignorance because they're promoting these myths indirectly to you. And there's no way for you to get around it because you have no power at all. If you had power, we would not be in the socioeconomic predicament that we're in. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. If you really came to understand that the story of Abraham is a fabrication, a myth, and that the best that you can get out of it is a moral to the story, like Aesop's fables. That's the best that you can get out of it. But you cannot get to the truth through what has no existential import. It's a dead end. If you claim to believe in God, have faith. And for most, that's the best they can do because you have not had direct experience. And that's part of the problem, because of your ignorance of the divine reality, your low-hanging fruit, easy pickings for demonic persons who want to exploit you in this life. That's the collateral effect of you believing in the myths. So if Abraham, for instance, didn't exist, and that's my basic thesis here, no one would take seriously anybody who said God promised Israel all the land that they're trying to take from their neighbors or have taken from their neighbors. No, they would perceive them as insane. And they would be right to do so. So if you have a comment, if you don't like what I said, fine. Leave a comment, express yourself, just don't curse or anything like that. That's okay. I'll answer you. I don't have a problem with talking to you. You know why? Because I know factually that if you make those absurd claims, you're talking about things that are false. And the truth always prevails in the end. I am Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Peace be unto you.